Come September, however, when General David Petraeus reports on the effectiveness of the surge, that could change. Without a dramatic improvement of the situation in Iraq, the candidates might well go their separate ways, with some, like Senator John McCain of Arizona, pushing for a stay-the-course approach and others agitating for a quicker end. USA Today editorial.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. Today we are asking the question, how is it U.S. presidential hopefuls as well as the media are dealing with Iraq? We are talking to Isabel McDonald, Neil Monroe and Nicholas Snow. Isabel, Nick was making the argument perhaps there was a complicity on the side of the American media. As a watcher of the American media, do you accept that argument?
Yes, I think that the American media has been key in pushing the issue of Iraq off the agenda for the election. I liked that quote that was just read out from USA Today, because at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, the Media Watch Group, we saw newspapers like USA Today making the case that the issue of Iraq was no longer a top election issue. And they often would look to American opinion, changes in American opinion, as justification for providing less coverage of the war, which I think becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when the media stop talking so much about what's going on in Iraq, even though we today have a situation with 4 million displaced people in Iraq, clearly there are huge problems, or there would not be so many refugees right now, both internal and external.
If that complacency, Nick, as well as perhaps a slight apathy, is it possible this could backfire come the election in November? There might be some sort of an October surprise, whether by the militias, by the insurgents, or by some other group.
Of course. I mean, there are plenty of examples. We'll remember Osama bin Laden's sort of pre-election address that arguably had a big impact on the 2004 election. The insurgents, or let's just generally call what's going on in the region, some of the people opposed to U.S. policy, as well as the Americans, have had a very good sense of media timing, of timing things to elections, etc. So there is a very good chance that a lot of big developments can come out of nowhere. I mean, there certainly is enough sort of firewood in the oven to assure that could happen, or to make that likely that it could happen, not just in Iraq. But let's remember in Pakistan, let's remember the supposed war that has fallen off the agenda completely in Afghanistan, which may, according to recent U.S. intelligence assessments and according to recent testimony by the CIA director, may indeed be sort of a hotbed of Sunni jihadism that may be now able to export itself to America. Whether you believe that or not, the point is that there are multiple conflicts going on in this region, in Israel-Palestine, here in Lebanon, that are very much affected by Iraq, that have their own sort of reasonings behind them as well, but that, at least from my perspective here in Beirut, looking at the U.S. media, have to a large degree fallen off the agenda.
Yeah, part of this central thing is the Democrats are being cautious. Look, McCain is running as an I'll win the war candidate, and that's important enough that he has he's going to be the Republican candidate. So he's in a betting in a way that the war will remain important enough to get him elected. On the other hand, the Democrats are subdivided. Obama is going for he's more emphasizing the let's get out now, etc. But Hillary has been more equivocal. She's planning now to win the nomination and tack back towards the center. And for her, the center means, well, reducing the number of troops, but not necessarily getting them all out. Because many Democrats, including Hillary, remember the last time they rushed out of a war. That would be in about 1974 in Vietnam. That was followed by many years of electoral and political defeat for Democrats. Democrats know what a defeat feels like. They're not going to willingly go through this again. The fact that the Democrats are being cautious should tell us something, because they're not stupid. They count the votes better than we do by reading the polls in the newspapers. And I assume at this point that Hillary is being cautious because if she's the nominee, she wants to be able to run on, I can win in Iraq and I can get our troops home.
Yes, there are so many problems with what you just said. Obama is not calling for a complete withdrawal. Like Hillary Clinton, he would keep he would keep non-combat troops in Iraq for years to come. In terms of this myth that the Vietnam War really turned the American public against the Democrats is really not historically accurate. The American people came to oppose the huge expense of taxpayers' money, the huge loss of lives, of American lives in Vietnam, and had moral objections to the war also.
That's
the very idea
the important
that
point
America
about Vietnam is the Democrats pulled out in
engaged in this war,
when there were no
issues
troops
which we will never
aid.
see in the mainstream media in America.
Candidates are not talking about pulling out of Iraq completely 100% tomorrow.
Right.
And if we are going by historical analysis, the Americans are going to be in Iraq for decades to come. General Petraeus is going to submit his report to Congress again in September. And most likely he is going to ask for American troops to stay in Iraq. So will that play in the American media just like it did with his first report?
Well, it certainly is not going to have the same impact that his first report had, although I say certainly, but I should immediately qualify that, in that we have quite a few months left to go before that report, and indeed before the elections. And I'll just say that although it may drop off of the pages of the Washington Post or the New York Times or even blogs, for example, that there are a tremendous amount of problems. And I think anyone who lives here in the region realizes that quite well on a daily basis. There are quite a lot of things that could go terribly wrong for
like
U.S.
what?
policy, U.S. interests.
Like what?
I mean, for example, if the Mahdi army refuses to uphold its ceasefire, for example. We just had a raid yesterday in Sadr City. Evidently, according to some reports, and again, according to the Arab media that we translate, a lot of the Mahdi army foot soldiers, as well as top leaders, want very much for Mukhtar al-Sadr to withdraw from that ceasefire.
The Americans, they have bought off the insurgent. Is it possible they can buy off the Mahdi army?
I don't know, but if it's not merely buying off the Sunni insurgents, you think they just accept American gold and switch? No. The reasons why the Sunnis have made a deal is in part because they see the strength of the Shia. They lost the Battle of Baghdad. They need to make a deal with what is arguably the strongest tribe in Iraq, namely the U.S. They're not irrational about this. The question, Nick's right about this. Though there are huge numbers of uncertainties, we have no idea what's going to happen next. The Mahdi army could go on a bender. The Iranians could increase their support and kill more Americans. On the other hand, maybe the Baskiri and the Sunnis might make a deal. We're going to find out in the next couple of months.
Isabel, if the death toll of U.S. troops rises again, like it used to be in 2006 and perhaps beginning of 2007, will that change the American body politics perception of the war in Iraq?
Oh, I think it would definitely change I think that would definitely change the perception. And I think that is why the strategy has shifted towards use of more air power and training Iraqi forces on the ground to take over, is because American politicians realized that there would be very little tolerance if there were to be a great number of American casualties that continue to turn up in body bags. I think that one other problem that I would see that sort of relates to what I think Nick was, I'm not sure if it was Nick or if it was Neil who was saying this, but people are generally, it was Neil actually, people are generally less engaged with issues that they feel they don't have, there's not much that they can do about. And I think that is where a lot of the media complicity is really to be seen, because if we look at the Democrats being elected into the House, they now have control of the House of Representatives, and they really could have cut off funding for the war. And the way that was reported in the media really took away that option. So after a very strong mandate was given to the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives to end the war, what we saw was that the Democrats really shied away from that mandate, and at the same time, the media provided justification for that by misreporting the options that were available to the Democrats and basically reporting the Democrats' failure and unwillingness to,
with that
to
keyword,
defund the war.
Let me just get a quick response from Neil and Nick regarding misrepresentation. Go ahead, you have 30 seconds.
First of all, yeah, generally the media's done a lousy job. Second of all, the Democrats cannot end the war. To end the war requires cooperation from the enemy, and they don't necessarily have that. They can end American participation in the war. And thirdly, if American casualties go up, we can't tell if that'll help McCain or the Democrats. Let's say it's Iranians killing Americans. Well, that could, the Americans could get really ticked off and say, okay, we'll vote for McCain to put the boot in. On the other hand, if the Sunnis turned and started killing Americans in the local bases, Americans could say, well, we just can't trust any of these people. We'll leave the Sunnis to the fate of the Shia and the Iranians.
Will the enemy cooperate with U.S. troops?
Will the enemy cooperate with U.S. troops? No, I don't think the enemy will cooperate with U.S. troops, although sometimes an enemy or two opponents have similar agendas which sort of come together in strange ways. But that may or may not be the case here. But you know, in terms of Neil's point, I would also say that, you know, a lot of it depends on whether or not the media really digs into these issues. For example, he cited the idea of Iranians possibly killing U.S. troops, let's say, or Iranian-backed insurgents or Iranian-backed militias. You know, is the New York Times or other mainstream media outlets going to get that story right?
Nicholas No, Neil Monroe, Isabel McDonald, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.